I remember my first semester when I got to Ole Miss to begin my graduate work in philosophy. I was assigned to be the TA for an Intro 101 course. If I remember correctly, Philosophy 101 was a required course at Ole Miss, so it was common for students, freshmen, to take it their first semester. The course that I was the TA for met every Tuesday and Thursday from 9:30 to 10:45. And it had about 200 students in it. And it met in the auditorium of the rec center. Some of you professors might have a similar story. That first day of class, the professor of the class and I walked over, and he did the usual boring first day of class stuff. He handed out the syllabus. You read and go over the syllabus, noting especially when tests and papers are. And then he launched into some philosophy. He began with arguments for and against the existence of God. He did that, he told me, because it was sure to get the attention and interest of 200 people wondering why they're having to take an Intro to Philosophy course. Wondering why they had to study any of this, or even just what is philosophy. He told them that philosophy was the discipline where we often talk about issues which seem to have no clear answer. The important thing he suggested to them was for them to think about them, to wrestle with the arguments and the concepts, and to not worry quite so much about making up your mind right now. It was important enough to engage the topic, to wade into the history of the arguments and the discussion, so that you found yourself a part of an eternal conversation. After the class was over, we gathered our things. He answered those few basic questions people come up to ask, like, can I get out of this test or paper? And we headed out the door, towards our department building. There was a young man standing out in front who was obviously waiting for us. And as we passed, he began to walk with us. He told us his name, where he was from, and then announced to the both of us that this was going to be a very easy course for him. The professor smiled a wry smile and asked him, why was that? He said he was smart. He made good grades in high school, and he'd already thought of most of these things before. The professor said something like, well, then it sounds like you have a good head start. Once the young man parted company from us, the professor turned to me and said, he's probably not going to last the semester. I can't remember if he did or not, but we never had another conversation with him after class. Two men go to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. One is an upright, devoted, pious servant of God. The other is a traitor, a cheat, a collaborator with the occupying Roman army. One expresses his many acts of service and devotion, his selfless giving, and his moral standing. The other confesses his faults, acknowledges and admits his failing, and asks only for mercy. This Pharisee, whatever Luke's gospel may lead you to think of Pharisees, has every right to feel satisfied. The Pharisee thanks God and shows his dependence on God. What the Pharisee has done, that list of good works, is above and beyond any requirement. This tax collector is no hero. Likely, he overcharges his fellow Jews, keeps some of the money for himself, and gives the rest to the occupying Roman government. Quite likely, he has filled his own pockets at other people's expense, while helping a brutal army show no mercy to his neighbors. It is tempting to read the Pharisee as the good guy, your laughter aside, and the tax collector as the bad guy. And one can even read, as apparently you did, the Pharisee as the model for some self-satisfying piety, and the tax collector as the grace-filled lost finally come home. Frankly, How you read this parable depends on how you read that Pharisee's prayer. And more honestly, if you're looking for a good guy and a bad guy in the parable. Both of those readings, I think, fly in the face of the parable's point. Once we negatively judge one character and promote the other, then we've fallen into the same judgmental system that Jesus speaks about and warns against. Both of these men's prayers have problems. The Pharisee clearly understands himself to be superior to that tax collector standing far away. He assumes his privileged place and he delights in being secure in it. The tax collector laments his despised status, and he doesn't seem particularly willing or interested to do something to make restitution or reconciliation with those he's harmed. The Pharisee has the actions, but not the attitude. The tax collector has the attitude, but no action plan. I think, in short, they would benefit from less conversation by themselves and more conversation with one another, more listening to one another. The problem, as I see it, with these two prayers is that they both presume a detached view of life. Maybe not detached from God, since they're both in the temple praying, but being in the temple or the church and praying to God doesn't make you a part of a community of faith. It doesn't connect your life with anyone else's. There's no being with here. Both of these earnest prayers seem to think that faith is a private and personal possession, a matter of their own effort which they can create and resolve on their own. The Pharisee lacks empathy and humility. The tax collector doesn't seem to be willing to change or repair the damage he's done. They're both lonely, cut off from one another and stuck in that position of detachment. I wonder if instead of the Pharisee naming all the stuff he's done and the tax collector lamenting his sinfulness, what might result if the two of them could share with one another what they shared with God? What might they learn from one another? Today, we've never been more connected to one another through social media, and we've never been more distant and isolated from one another, stuck in our own realities. Having a chat through your phone or favorite app isn't the same thing as sitting down with someone to hear, look, see, and listen to a person. It seems to me in nearly all the issues we're struggling with in our country, nothing could be more beneficial to stitching back together our tattered bonds of humanity than some conversation which involves vulnerability to speak and humility to listen. The Pharisee wants to triumph in his good deeds and spiritual wellness, and he's certainly done good things to be proud of. The tax collector admits he's sick and in need of mercy, but he just doesn't seem to know how to change course on his own. The Pharisee could benefit from listening to the tax collector without the need to be right. The tax collector could benefit from taking some lessons from the Pharisee without fear of loss. We would do well to hear them both, then reflect on what our neighbor, the one distant from us because of their politics, their race, their gender, their background, their job, their lifestyle, their whatever, keeps them, or rather keeps us distant from them. The glory of God is a human being fully alive, wrote the 2nd century theologian St. Irenaeus. We can't be fully alive without one another and without God. We can't be so focused on our own success, our own pride, our own mistakes, our own worth, that we can dismiss and write off others who might have something to teach us if only we can stop arguing and listen. That takes a willingness to want to be part of something bigger than us, so that we don't miss the opportunity to learn and put into practice what we believe. Philosophy is the search for truth. It's an eternal conversation, and so is prayer. Neither can be fully done by a monologue. We need others. We need to participate in a community which can support us when we're feeling weak and challenge us when we're feeling strong. The search for truth is more than an idea, a concept, or a doctrine. It is, as Henry Nouwen reminds us, a true relationship. Jesus tells this parable, I think, not to condemn us, but to move us from the many things to the one necessary thing: relationship, attentiveness, participation. It's not just about doing more or having more or giving more or even succeeding at any of it. It's about a change of heart. Both of these men who come to the temple to pray could use a change of heart. Both are in search of forgiveness, which is the one thing they can't give themselves and the very thing they could give one another. God's eternal conversation is with us, each of us, all of us, in moments when we're good, sweet, and smart, and in moments when we're petty, angry, and miserable. It's a conversation with many partners, not just me and God alone, and not just you and God alone. That's why what we do here in this space means so much, why we engage in common prayer, and that's so important to our spiritual lives. You just simply can't do church on your own. I hear the warning of this parable to be directed at our tendency towards isolation and self-absorption. Overcoming that takes a reorientation, which the parable literally offers. What begins with the Pharisee named first as the two men going up to the temple to pray concludes with the tax collector, this time named first, going down towards home alongside the Pharisee. What begins in distance can become, with God's help, the ability to create relationship across vast distance. Sometimes distance is so vast as right next to one another.